My name is Elena Vasquez. I am 34 years old, and I am the daughter my family never thought would matter. 11 months ago, my entire extended family, my parents, 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and 6 cousins coordinated flights across 15 states, traveling from the humid suburbs of New Jersey all the way to the Pacific coast of Southern California to attend a party for children who hadn't even been born yet. They booked first-class seats. They reserved oceanfront hotel suites. They stayed for 4 days. My father, a man who has complained about his mild arthritis every single day for the past 11 years, practically sprinted through Newark Airport to make his connection. 6 weeks later, I sat alone in a bridal suite in the Poconos Mountains of Pennsylvania, wearing a dress I had chosen without my mother's opinion, holding a bouquet of white ranunculus that no one in my family had ever seen. Staring at a phone with no notifications from any of them. The venue was exactly a 2-hour and 15-minute drive from my parents' house in New Jersey. A straight shot down the interstate. Familiar terrain. Easy roads. And the 50 chairs arranged on the left side of the aisle, the chairs designated for my family, were completely and utterly empty. My hands did not tremble. My throat did not tighten. I had already done my grieving years before that morning. What I didn't know yet, sitting in that quiet room with the scent of fresh flowers drifting through the open window, was that exactly 34 days after my wedding, my phone would begin to violently detonate with 14 consecutive calls from my mother, followed by a flood of text messages and frantic voicemails from every single member of the family who had been too exhausted to drive 2 hours to watch me get married. And I want to tell you exactly what happened when I finally picked up. Before I go any further, if this story is already hitting somewhere familiar, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if it genuinely connects with you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to know who's listening. Now let me take you back to the second Saturday in June, when I finally understood that my family's hierarchy was not a temporary phase. It was a permanent institution. I grew up in a 4-bedroom colonial in Westfield, New Jersey, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were perfectly edged and the Christmas lights went up the weekend after Thanksgiving without exception. From the outside, we looked like exactly what my parents worked very hard to project, a successful, tightly knit, upper-middle-class family with a father who ran his own insurance brokerage and a mother who chaired 3 separate charitable committees and never once attended a school play without a fully coordinated outfit. From the inside, we were a family with a designated star and a designated supporting cast. My sister Chloe is 4 years younger than me. She was born with my mother's exact cheekbones and my father's exact charisma, and from approximately the moment she could form sentences, the entire architecture of our household quietly rearranged itself around her comfort, her preferences, and her limitless appetite for applause. I was 8 years old the first time I understood the shape of what I was living inside. I had won a regional spelling bee at my elementary school, 3rd place, a small white ribbon, 23 competitors. I came home with it pinned to my shirt, breathless and proud. My mother was on the phone. She held up one finger without looking at me. I waited 17 minutes by the clock on the kitchen wall. When she finally hung up, she said, "That's nice, sweetheart," and asked me to set the table for dinner. That same month, Chloe placed second in a recreational gymnastics recital. My parents bought her a bouquet of pink roses from the florist on the corner, took her to dinner at the Italian restaurant downtown, and called my grandmother to share the news. I kept the white ribbon in a shoebox under my bed for 11 years. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I needed the evidence. At 12, I asked my mother if I could take a summer writing workshop at the County Arts Center. It cost $340. She said they couldn't swing it that year. 3 weeks later, Chloe got a $1,200 private gymnastics coach because one of the other mothers at the rec center had mentioned that Chloe had natural talent and it would be a shame not to develop it. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not cry. I went to the public library and checked out every writing book on the shelf, and I sat in my room and I taught myself. That is the quality that my family consistently mistook for indifference. I adapted. I found other ways. And because I never screamed for attention, they concluded that I didn't need any. At 17, I was accepted into the honors program at Rutgers University. My father sat me down at the kitchen table, clasped his hands together in that way he had when he was about to deliver a verdict, and told me they would cover my tuition, but I'd need to work a part-time job to handle personal expenses because, and I remember this sentence word for word, college was the kind of investment that built character when you had some skin in the game. I nodded. I took the job. I waited tables at a diner on Route 27 for all 4 years of my undergraduate degree. Chloe attended a private liberal arts college in Vermont 4 years later. My parents paid $62,000 a year, covered her housing, her meal plan, her study abroad semester in Florence, and sent her a monthly personal allowance of $400. They never mentioned building character. Not once. The person who saw all of this clearly, who named it without flinching, was my maternal grandmother, Nona Rose. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman who kept a kitchen that smelled permanently of anise cookies and strong coffee, and who had a habit of watching people with the quiet, calibrated attention of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to read rooms before she walked into them. When I was 22 and home for the holidays, she took me aside in that kitchen, pressed both of my hands between hers, and looked at me with the kind of directness that left no room for polite deflection. "You see everything, Elena," she said, "and you're smart enough to stay quiet about it. That's going to be your greatest asset one day." She paused, and something shifted behind her eyes. "I've taken care of things, sweetheart. Whatever happens, you will not be left without a foundation." I didn't fully understand what she meant. I told myself it was the kind of reassurance that grandmothers offered the way they offered food, abundantly, out of love, without specific obligation. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and went back to the table. She passed away 14 months later, on a Thursday morning in February, at 7:22 a.m., at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Princeton. She left behind a will that I would not fully understand the significance of for another 4 years. But I am getting ahead of myself. I spent my 20s building a life that my family consistently failed to see because it did not announce itself loudly. I got my master's degree in communications from Columbia. I built a freelance consulting practice that, by my 31st birthday, was generating $186,000 a year in net revenue. I had a small, beautiful apartment in Hoboken with a view of the Manhattan skyline, a circle of profoundly loyal friends, and a relationship with my own mind that I had constructed, brick by brick, entirely without my family's participation. I met David at a conference in Boston on a Friday afternoon in October, 3.5 years ago. He was sitting across a circular table from me during a breakout session on corporate media strategy, wearing a dark green sweater and taking notes by hand in a leather journal with a fountain pen, which I remember thinking was an extremely specific choice for a man at a technology conference. He was quiet, almost conspicuously so, in the way that only people who are completely certain of their own authority can afford to be in a room full of people competing for the same air. We talked for 3 hours over dinner that evening. We talked until the restaurant closed. We have essentially not stopped talking since. What my family would later discover about David is not something I am going to rush through here, because the sequence in which they discovered it matters enormously to understanding what happened next. What I will tell you now is only what they knew, or chose to know, in those early months, that he was quiet, that he drove a 5-year-old sedan, that he wore unbranded clothing, and that he worked in finance. That last part they filed under mid-level, without asking a single follow-up question. They offered him no curiosity. They offered him no genuine welcome. And they offered me, as they always had, the minimum required performance of familial participation. The inciting event, the moment that set the precise trajectory of everything that followed, occurred on the second Saturday in June at a rented beachfront cabana in Malibu, California. It was 11:40 in the morning. The Pacific was an almost obscene shade of blue. A string quartet on the sand was playing a pop song I vaguely recognized, and a helicopter, an actual chartered helicopter, was making its approach over the water, carrying what I later learned was $4,800 worth of biodegradable pink and blue confetti to release over the ocean at the moment of the reveal. I was standing at the periphery of the cabana in a sundress I had bought for the occasion, watching my father lean in close to Chloe's husband Greg with the particular body language he reserved for men he considered worth impressing, when I felt the full, unambiguous weight of understanding settle onto my shoulders like something physical. My parents had spent an estimated $14,000 on flights, hotel suites, and their contribution to the event costs. They had taken a week off work. They had coordinated arrivals with 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and 6 cousins across 6 different time zones. They had done all of this for a party, a beautiful party, genuinely, but a party nonetheless. A party to celebrate the chromosomal outcome of 2 embryos that had not yet taken their first breath. David was standing beside me. He had come at my request, quietly, without complaint, and had spent most of the afternoon being cheerfully invisible in the way that only deeply secure people can manage. He felt me still and turned slightly to look at my face. "You okay?" he said, just low enough for me to hear. I watched my mother take Chloe's face in both hands and say something that made everyone within earshot laugh with the warm, practiced ease of people performing love for a photographer. I watched my father raise his glass. I watched the confetti fall. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I had, in that moment, with the Pacific glittering in front of me and the helicopter banking away over the water, arrived at a clarity so complete and so permanent that it felt less like an emotion and more like a fact. 6 weeks later, I would be getting married. And I already knew, somewhere in the calcified center of the truth I had been carrying for 30 years, that none of them would come. I did not set out to build a case. That is important to understand. What I did was something quieter and more instinctual than strategy. I simply began, for the first time in my life, to pay precise attention to what was actually happening and to document it without sentiment. The week I returned from Malibu, I called my mother to discuss wedding logistics. It was a Tuesday, just after 9:30 in the morning. I had the venue confirmed, the date set, the invitations printed. David and I had chosen the estate in the Poconos partly for its beauty and partly because it was genuinely, objectively accessible, 2 hours and 15 minutes from my parents' front door on a clear day. I had already sent the invitations. I was calling to discuss accommodations and whether they might want to bring anyone. My mother's response was warm in the surface way that she was always warm, the specific warmth of someone who was not fully present in the conversation, but wanted full credit for having engaged in it. "Of course, sweetheart," she said. "We'll make it work." I screenshot that call log. I saved it to a folder on my phone. I labeled the folder Family. I don't entirely know why I did it in that moment. I think some part of me already understood that this conversation was going to matter later. Over the following 3 weeks, I noticed a pattern that I had always peripherally registered but never allowed myself to name directly. The group family text chain, a thread of 47 people that my mother maintained with the dedication of a community manager, lit up daily with commentary about Chloe's pregnancy, ultrasound photos, registry links, a thread dedicated exclusively to debating nursery color palettes. My Aunt Sandra, who I had not received a direct personal message from in 14 months, posted a 3-paragraph meditation on the spiritual significance of twins within 20 minutes of Chloe's anatomy scan results. I counted the messages sent to me on that chain in the 30 days following the gender reveal. 17. All of them either logistical threads about group plans for Chloe's baby shower or reactions to photos Chloe had posted. Not one asked how the wedding planning was going. Not one asked how I was doing. I kept a log. Not out of bitterness, I want to be precise about this, but out of the same instinct that makes you document a leak in the ceiling before calling the landlord. Not anger. Evidence. The first clear signal came on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding. I was sitting at my kitchen table going through vendor confirmations when my phone rang. It was my cousin Diane, whom I genuinely liked and who had always existed in our family as a kind of hapless honest broker, constitutionally incapable of successfully executing a deception. Her voice was careful in the specific way that people's voices get when they are delivering information they have been tasked with delivering, but do not personally endorse. "Hey, so, I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said, and then there was a pause that lasted long enough for me to set down my pen. I think some people might be having trouble making it to the wedding. Like, your parents are worried about the drive. And your Aunt Sandra mentioned something about the timing. I kept my voice completely neutral. What specifically did they say? Another pause. I could hear her sitting down somewhere. I don't want to be in the middle of this. You're already in the middle, I said, gently. I'd rather know now. There was a long breath. Your mom asked everyone on a separate thread, not the main one, whether people thought the drive was too much. And most people kind of agreed it was a lot, given that they'd just done the California thing. I put the phone down for a moment, not dramatically, just to give myself 3 seconds to absorb the full shape of what she had just told me. There was a separate thread, a thread I was not on, a thread in which my family had collectively, actively decided, as a group, that attending my wedding was too inconvenient to manage. I picked the phone back up. Thank you for telling me, I said. I meant it sincerely. After I hung up, I opened my phone, navigated to the family folder, and created a subfolder. I labeled it Thread. I could not get access to the messages directly, but I had Diane's account of what had been said. And I had the pattern. And the pattern was, by that point, undeniable. I want to tell you what I found when I sat with all of it. The call logs, the group chat records I did have, Diane's testimony, the invitations sent, and the RSVPs that never came for the first time at 2:14 in the morning, for days before my wedding. I had laid it all out on my kitchen table. Not physically. All of it was on my phone and laptop, but I had made a document, and I had organized it chronologically, and I was reading it the way you read something that you already know but need to see written in sequence to fully metabolize. 14 family members. 0 RSVPs confirmed. 6 formal invitations sent to primary family units, each with a response deadline that had passed 11 days prior. 1 call from my mother 3 days before the wedding, delivering the excuse with practiced composure. 1 reference to my father's back. 1 reference to the California trip's fatigue. 0 acknowledgement of the irony. 0 acknowledgement of me. David found me there at 2:14 a.m. He made 2 cups of tea and sat down across from me without speaking, which is one of the most profound forms of love I have ever been shown by another human being. They're not coming, I said. He looked at the table, then at me. No, he said simply. And they're going to want something eventually, I said. From you. They don't know who you are yet. But they'll find out. He wrapped both hands around his mug. What do you want to do when they do? I thought about Nona Rose, pressing my hands between hers in her kitchen. I thought about the white ribbon in the shoebox. I thought about the separate thread. I want to be ready, I said. And I want to be honest. He nodded. He did not push. He did not strategize out loud. He simply sat with me in the kitchen at 2:14 in the morning and let me know, without a single word, that whatever came next, I would not be sitting with it alone. That was when I stopped trying to manage their love and started simply observing it. And what I was about to observe would exceed even my most calibrated expectations. If you're listening to this and nodding, if this sequence of events feels like something you've lived inside, you are not alone. Thousands of people have sat in their own kitchens at 2 a.m. with the same documents, the same pattern, the same quietly devastating clarity. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done right here? The morning of my wedding arrived with the particular, almost theatrical quality of light that the Poconos Mountains produce in early July, gold and clean and completely indifferent to the circumstances of the people below it. I woke at 6:08 a.m. in the master suite of the estate. Through the bedroom windows I could see the terrace gardens beginning to take the shape of what they would become in 4 hours. Rows of white wooden chairs, the canopy of willow trees, the stone path leading to the outdoor altar that David and I had walked together the previous evening to confirm the sight lines. It was, objectively, stunning. The kind of setting that people spent years saving to afford. It belonged to my husband. I showered, dressed in the robe my closest friend Margot had given me the night before, ivory silk, monogrammed with my initials, and sat at the vanity in the bridal suite while Margot did my hair. She had known me for 11 years. She had heard every version of this family story and had never once minimized any of it. Your phone, she said quietly. I looked at it on the edge of the vanity. Completely still. No notifications from any of the people who shared my last name. I know, I said. Do you need a minute? No, I said. And this was true. The grief, as I had told David 2 nights before, had been processed long ago. What was left in its place was not numbness, but clarity, the specific, crystalline clarity of someone who has finally stopped pretending that a situation might resolve itself differently than every piece of available evidence suggests it will. I put on my dress. I picked up my bouquet, white ranunculus, tight and clean and unperfumed. I walked out of the room. What my family did not know, had never known, had never bothered to find out, was the precise nature of what they were declining to witness. David James Harrington is 41 years old. He is the founder and principal managing partner of Horizon Ventures, a technology investment firm headquartered on the 40th floor of a building on Park Avenue in Manhattan. As of our wedding date, Horizon Ventures managed approximately $2.3 billion in assets under management. David's personal net worth, which he has never once volunteered to anyone who has not specifically needed to know it for professional or legal reasons, renders my parents' upper-middle-class suburban presentation, the country club membership, the least luxury sedan, the performative philanthropy as something closely resembling a child's drawing of a house next to an actual house. He does not photograph publicly. His name does not appear in the trade press with any frequency. He prefers to operate entirely through the quality of his decisions, which has always struck me as one of the most quietly powerful things about him. My family had met him at 3 separate family gatherings over the course of our relationship. At each of these gatherings, they had arrived at the same rapid consensus: quiet man, modest presentation, probably comfortable, certainly unremarkable. My father had once, over dessert, given him an unsolicited 5-minute explanation of how venture capital worked. David had listened with complete, attentive courtesy and thanked him for the perspective. I had taken a very long sip of my water. What my family also did not know was the specific professional situation of my brother-in-law, Gregory Marsh, who had been married to my sister Chloe for 3 years and who had spent the duration of those 3 years constructing an elaborate public mythology around a technology startup called ClearPath Analytics, which he described at every family gathering with the practiced vocabulary of a man who had read several articles about disruption and innovation and had concluded that confidence was an adequate substitute for competence. ClearPath Analytics was, by the time of our wedding, hemorrhaging $340,000 per quarter and had missed its Series A revenue milestones by a margin that its own investors found difficult to discuss without visible discomfort. Greg had been pitching for Series B funding for 18 months. He had been rejected by 9 firms. He spoke about the gatekeepers at the larger firms with the specific frustration of a man who believed the only reason he had not succeeded was that the right people had not yet been given the opportunity to recognize his genius. For the past 8 months, Greg had been attempting to get a pitch meeting at Horizon Ventures. He had been told, with professional courtesy, on 3 separate occasions, that the firm was not accepting unsolicited pitches from companies at ClearPath stage. He had complained about this at 2 family dinners and 1 holiday party. He had described the firm's CEO, whom he had never met, whose face he would not have recognized, as one of the most inaccessible power brokers on the East Coast, with a mixture of awe and resentment that David, seated 3 feet away from him, had received without a flicker of expression. I had never said anything. David had never said anything. We had made a mutual, deliberate decision, early in our relationship, to maintain a complete firewall between his professional identity and my family's social sphere, for precisely the reasons I have already described, because I knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who has spent 34 years studying these specific people, exactly what would happen the moment they understood the truth. They would not love me more. They would simply find a new use for me. The ceremony was at 11 a.m. on a Saturday. I walked down the stone path through the willow canopy toward David with the morning sun coming through the leaves in long, soft spokes, and I kept my eyes on his face, and I felt, for the first time in my adult life, that I was walking toward something rather than away from it. The 50 empty chairs on the left side of the aisle threw no shadow. I did not look at them. We were married at 11:24 a.m. on the second Saturday of July, surrounded by 42 people who had chosen, without obligation or performance, to be there. The reception was held on the East Terrace as the afternoon light turned gold over the lake. The food was extraordinary. The champagne was a 2015 vintage that David had selected himself. There was dancing. There was laughter of the genuine, unguarded variety that only happens when no one in the room is performing for anyone else. Margot gave a speech that made 11 people cry, including David, which I will never forget as long as I live. Late in the evening, as the catering staff moved quietly around us clearing the last of the tables, David and I stood on the stone terrace above the private lake. The water was black and perfectly still. The grounds stretched out in the dark, 70 acres of absolute, private quiet. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" I looked at the lake, at the lights of the estate reflected in it, at the life I had built, slowly and mostly alone, into something that had outgrown every diminished version of me that my family had required me to be. Their absence was the greatest gift they could have given me, I said. It removed the last piece of ambiguity. I don't have to wonder anymore. He was quiet for a moment. And what comes next? I leaned back into him. The night smelled like warm stone and cut grass, and something faint and sweet that might have been the lake itself. "We wait," I said. "They'll find us." The metronome was already counting down. 34 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-August, I was sitting on the back porch of the estate in the particular, suspended kind of quiet that early afternoon produces in the Pennsylvania countryside, birdsong, wind in the oaks, the faint sound of the groundskeeper's equipment somewhere on the north side of the property. I had a cup of chamomile tea, a book I was not reading. My phone, face up on the table beside me, had been silent from my family's direction since the day after the wedding, when my mother had sent a text that read, "Thinking of you both. Hope the day was lovely," with the emotional temperature of a corporate acknowledgement email. I knew the call was coming. I had known it was coming since the moment I watched Greg set up his slides and clear his throat at the table of a firm whose CEO was currently deciding whether to have a second cup of coffee that morning. I want to tell you exactly what David told me later that evening about what happened in that boardroom. Greg had walked into the 40-floor glass-walled conference room at Horizons Park Avenue headquarters at 10 a.m. wearing what David later described as a suit that cost more than Greg's current quarterly take-home and had, in the manner of a man who had rehearsed for this moment at length, spent the first 12 minutes of the meeting attempting to establish social rapport with the junior partners before the managing team entered. David entered at 10:14 a.m. He sat at the head of the mahogany conference table. It took Greg 11 seconds to recognize him. David told me this with the precise, unhurried quality of someone recounting a professional interaction that had ended exactly as he had expected it to. He said Greg's face had gone through approximately 4 distinct phases in those 11 seconds: confusion, recalibration, dawning comprehension, and then something that David described simply as a complete loss of structural composure. David did not make eye contact beyond what was professionally required. He did not mention the wedding. He did not mention me. He reviewed the pitch materials that had been submitted in advance. He listened to the presentation in its entirety with the focused, neutral courtesy he extended to every presenter, regardless of outcome, because he believed that even a flawed idea deserved a full hearing. And then he closed the dossier, steepled his fingers, and proceeded to dismantle ClearPath Analytics with the methodical, surgical precision of a man who had read every financial disclosure, understood every structural weakness, and had arrived at his conclusion before Greg had finished the title slide. The burn rate was unsustainable by a factor of 2.4. The user acquisition metrics had been calculated using a methodology that would not withstand institutional scrutiny. The core technology was not proprietary and could be replicated at a fraction of ClearPath's operational cost by any of 4 existing competitors who were better capitalized. The Series B valuation being sought was, in David's professional assessment, approximately $8 million above any defensible market figure. He delivered all of this calmly, specifically, without elevation of voice or personal commentary. He thanked Greg for his time. He wished ClearPath well in its next phase of development. He stood, indicating the meeting was concluded. Greg was escorted from the building at 11:08 a.m. At 1:23 p.m., my phone rang for the first time. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. At 1:31 p.m., she called again. Voicemail. At 1:47 p.m., my father called. Voicemail. Between 1:47 and 3:15 p.m., my phone received 11 additional calls from various family members, my mother twice more, my Aunt Sandra, 2 of my cousins, and at 2:52 p.m., a number I did not immediately recognize that turned out to be Chloe calling from a landline, which told me everything I needed to know about the level of desperation that had been reached. I sat on the porch and finished my tea. I watched the light move through the oak trees. I want to be honest with you, entirely calm. Not numb. Not suppressing anything. Genuinely, profoundly calm, the calm of a person who had seen this coming from a great distance and had arrived at the destination entirely prepared. At 3:16 p.m., my mother called for the 14th time. I picked up. Her voice was unrecognizable. The practiced composure, the carefully modulated tone of a woman who had spent decades perfecting the specific emotional performance of someone above the need for conflict, was completely gone. What was left was raw, unmediated panic, barely dressed up as concern for her daughter. Elena. The way she said my name was not a greeting. It was an opening bid. Mom. We need to talk about what happened today. A pause. With David. With the meeting. I don't think you understand the situation. Tell me what situation you think I don't understand, I said. She took a breath. I could hear her composing herself, reaching for the version of this conversation that positioned her correctly. Greg is Elena. This is serious. ClearPath is in a very precarious place financially, and if David's firm doesn't come in with the funding, the whole thing collapses. Chloe is 8 months pregnant. They have a mortgage. You have to understand what kind of position we're all in. I understand the position, I said. Then you understand why we need you to speak to David. To explain that Greg is family. That this isn't just a business. It's our family's future. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. 5 seconds. Then I said, very slowly and very clearly, Greg is not my family. A pause. Then Elena. My family, I said, consists of my husband and the 42 people who drove, flew, and in some cases took trains to be present in the Poconos Mountains on the second Saturday of July to watch me get married. You made it abundantly clear that a two-hour drive down the interstate was an insurmountable hardship for people who had just coordinated cross-country flights to California. I have respected that clarity. I am asking you to respect mine. That was completely different, she started. In what way, I said, was it different? Silence. Not the kind she had designed. The other kind. Chloe needed us. She was having a high-risk pregnancy, and I was getting married. My voice did not rise. Once. To the person I intend to spend the rest of my life with. And you told me a two-hour drive was too taxing. You told me a wedding is just a party. Those are your words, Mom. I didn't make them up. I didn't mean. I believe you meant exactly what you said, I told her. I believe you meant it at the time, and I believe you stand behind it now, and what I'm telling you is that I made the same calculation in reverse. Walking to my husband's office to ask him to compromise his firm's integrity for a man who couldn't RSVP to our wedding is simply too taxing on my energy. There was a long silence on the line, longer than anything she had produced in the conversation so far. I waited. Elena. Her voice was different now, quieter. Something underneath the performance was cracking. We're your parents. Whatever happened, whatever we did, you can't just... I'm not just doing anything, I said. This is a consequence. Consequences are not punishments. They are simply what happens when choices meet reality. Greg is going to lose everything. Her voice broke on the last word. Genuinely broke. Your father had to, we may need to, Elena, the retirement accounts. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. I meant it. I did not mean it as cruelty. I meant it the way you mean it when someone tells you they missed the last train, sorry for the inconvenience, aware that no amount of your sympathy changes the schedule. Please. And this was the word that I had never, in 34 years, heard her produce without engineering. Please, without its usual surround of qualification and technique. Just, please. You're my daughter. I closed my eyes for a moment. The birdsong was still there. The oaks. The warm weight of the afternoon. You are my mother, I said. And I love you in the way that I've always loved you, which is completely, and from a distance that keeps me intact. I'm going to hang up now. I wish Greg well. I wish the twins well. I wish all of you well. She said my name one more time. I hung up. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. The screen went dark. I set it face down on the table and picked up my tea, which had gone cold, and drank the rest of it anyway. Then I went inside to find my husband. He was in his office, working. He looked up when I came in. Read my face the way he always read my face, completely, without requiring translation. How'd it go? He asked. Exactly as expected, I said. He nodded. He reached out and took my hand across the corner of the desk. Are you okay? Yes, I said. And this time, more than ever before in my life, it was not a performance. It was not a management of pain. It was a simple, unadorned truth. I was okay. I was more than okay. I was free. I know some of you are feeling this right now. If this hits close to home, if you've ever been the one waiting by the phone that never rang, tap the like button. The hardest part is already over. Stay with me. I did not block my mother's number that evening. That came 3 days later, after the second call, in which the tone had shifted from broken pleading to a carefully reconstructed narrative that assigned responsibility for the family's current situation to my coldness and my decision to weaponize David's position against people who had, as she framed it, always only wanted the best for both of us. That call lasted 4 minutes. I did not raise my voice during any of it. When she finished, I said, I'm going to end this call now, and I'm going to take some time away from contact with the family. I'd ask you to respect that. She began to respond, and I said, take care of yourself, and I ended the call, and I blocked her number, my father's number, Chloe's number, and 3 additional family numbers that had attempted contact in the preceding 48 hours. And I did all of this with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone clearing a desk before beginning new work. Margot texted me that evening, You doing okay? I sent back, better than okay. Genuinely. She replied with a single image, a cup of tea and a sunrise, and that was the entirety of the support I required. In the weeks that followed, the fallout organized itself into predictable categories. My Aunt Sandra sent a letter, an actual physical letter, which I found almost impressive in its formality, in which she described my behavior as a betrayal of family values and expressed her deep sadness at my willingness to punish the entire family for circumstances beyond our control. I read it once, placed it in a folder in my filing cabinet, and did not respond. 2 of my cousins, Diane, and a younger cousin named Marcus, who had always been more observer than participant in the family drama, reached out separately with genuine, uncomplicated apologies for not having been more present in the months surrounding the wedding. Diane's message was careful and earnest. I should have pushed back more on that thread. I knew it was wrong and I went quiet. I'm sorry. I called her. We talked for an hour. I told her there was nothing to forgive on her end, and I meant it. My mother's 3rd attempt at contact came not by phone, but through my father, who sent an email, his first direct written communication to me in 11 months, in which he said, with obvious discomfort, that he had done some reflection, that he understood the wedding situation had been handled badly, and that he hoped we might find a way to talk. It was the most emotionally direct communication I had received from him in my adult life, and I sat with it for 3 days before responding simply, I appreciate you writing. I need more time. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. I am still not ready. That is an honest statement, not a threat. Greg's startup, ClearPath Analytics, filed for bankruptcy protection 11 weeks after the Horizon Ventures meeting. The filing was a matter of public record, reported in a trade publication I do not regularly read, which a colleague forwarded to me without comment. The amount owed to creditors at the time of filing was $1.7 million. My parents had, according to Diane, liquidated a portion of their investment account to cover 3 months of Chloe's mortgage and the hospital costs associated with the twins' birth, which was medically uncomplicated, which I was genuinely glad to hear. My parents sold the Westfield house 8 months after the filing. The colonial with the perfectly edged lawn and the Christmas lights that went up the weekend after Thanksgiving without exception sold for $847,000, which covered the remaining mortgage and left them enough to purchase a modest condominium in a retirement community in Boca Raton. My father's arthritis, which had been too severe to manage a tower drive to Pennsylvania, apparently posed no barrier to the relocation. I learned all of this through Diane, who continued to exist in the honest broker role she had always occupied. I did not ask for the information. She offered it in the careful, non-dramatizing way that told me she was not delivering it as ammunition, but as a courtesy, the kind of update you give a person so they are not blindsided. David and I spent the first year of our marriage discovering what it felt like to build a life without the constant background noise of managing other people's perceptions of it. We traveled quietly, without announcements, to places chosen entirely according to our own preferences. I expanded my consulting practice. He continued his work with the meticulous, focused pleasure of a man who genuinely loves what he does. In November of that first year, our family attorney presented me with a full accounting of Nona Rose's estate, the final distribution of which had been dependent on my marriage, a condition she had specified with characteristic precision, because she had known, with the same clarity she had shown sitting across from me in that cookie-scented kitchen, exactly how the people around me operated. The estate included a cottage on Cannon Beach in Oregon, 3 acres of land, and a trust valued at $214,000. I flew to Oregon on a Thursday morning in early December, stood in front of the cottage in the cold, clean Pacific air, and thought about a small woman with sharp eyes who had paid attention when no one else did. "I've taken care of things, sweetheart." She had. She absolutely had. I sat on the porch of the cottage and called David. He answered on the second ring. "It's perfect," I said. "Good," he said. I could hear him smiling. "When do we go?" "My name is Elena Vasquez Harrington. I am 34 years old, and I have not sat at my parents' table in 14 months. I own a cottage on Cannon Beach, Oregon, where the Pacific fog rolls in off the water before dawn and burns away by 10 o'clock, leaving behind a sky of almost aggressive clarity. I have a navy cashmere scarf that I bought myself the week before my wedding, the most expensive thing in my closet at the time, that I wore on my wedding morning and have worn on every significant occasion since. It's a small thing, but it is mine, chosen without permission or approval, and every time I wear it, it reminds me of the exact quality of light in the Pocono Mountains on that Saturday morning when I understood, fully and finally, that I was worth the investment. I think about what I would tell anyone who is listening to this and recognizing their own life in the architecture of mine. And I want to be careful here, because this is not about anger, and it is not about revenge, and it is not about the satisfaction of watching someone fail. I have felt all of those things at various points, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending otherwise would be dishonest, and you deserve honesty. Here is what I know to be true. The first thing is this: when people consistently demonstrate that their love is conditional, that their investment in you is precisely calibrated to what your existence can do for their public standing, their financial position, or their social performance, you must believe them. Not the version of them that exists in your hope. The version of them that exists in their actual behavior. The behavior is the truth. Everything else is the story they tell to avoid accountability for the behavior. The second thing is this: the family you are born into is the family you are born into. It is not automatically the family you owe your life to. There is a version of loyalty that is actually just fear dressed in respectable clothing, fear of being the person who walked away, fear of being difficult, fear of losing even a love that was never reliably present. That fear kept me at tables where I was invisible for a very long time. I want you to know it is possible to leave those tables. I want you to know the air is different when you do. The third thing is the one I want to leave you with, and it is the simplest. You do not owe your success to the people who ignored you while you were building it. You do not owe them access to the life you constructed without their help. You do not owe them a revised seat assignment just because the stakes have changed and they've decided, retroactively, to find you interesting. The worth of a person is not determined by the moment someone else discovers it. It was always there. It was there in the bridal suite when the phone was silent. It was there at the spelling bee with the white ribbon. It was there at the diner on Route 27 on a Tuesday night in February. Some of you are thinking right now, but wasn't there a part of me that felt guilty? Wasn't there something that hurt, even through all that clarity? Yes, of course there was. There is no version of this that doesn't involve grief. You grieve for the parents you needed and did not have. You grieve for the sister you wanted and did not get. You grieve for the version of family that the word implies warmth, presence, unconditional regard, and that yours consistently failed to deliver. That grief is real, and it is valid, and it does not disqualify your decisions. You can grieve the absence of something and simultaneously refuse to keep paying the price of its absence with your own well-being. What I did not do, and this is the part one I'm most at peace with, was stay quiet out of hope. I had spent 30 years staying quiet out of hope. The hope that consistency would be rewarded. The hope that biology would eventually mandate belonging. The hope that if I was simply patient enough, good enough, small enough, they would look up and see me. They saw me when I became useful to them. And that is not the same thing. The greatest revenge, and I use that word loosely, because what I actually mean is the greatest correction, is not anger. It is not confrontation, though confrontation has its place. It is the absolute, unbothered reality of a life that does not require their approval to be worth living. It is chamomile tea on a back porch in the afternoon. It is 42 people who drove to the mountains on a Saturday morning because they wanted to. It is a cottage on the Oregon coast that smells like salt and would smoke and belongs to no one who ever made me feel small. It is the profound, liberating permission to be exactly who you are in a room that was built by and for people who love you, not people who need you. There is a difference. Once you feel it, you will never be able to accept the substitute again. If you have been the overlooked child, the pragmatic sibling, the one who adapted quietly and was consequently assumed not to require care, I want you to hear this very directly. Your silence was never proof of your adequacy. It was proof of your strength. And your strength does not belong to the people who benefited from your silence. It belongs to you. Use it accordingly. If this story spoke to you, if you heard something in it that sounded like your own life, leave a comment. Tell me, what was the boundary that changed everything for you? I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories to tell. Stories about people who stayed quiet long enough and then, one afternoon, simply stopped. Take care of yourself. I mean that with everything I have.